The Count of Monte Cristo, Chapter 7. The Examination. No sooner had Villefort left the saloon than he dropped the mask of gaiety and assumed the grave air of a man who holds the balance of life and death in his hands. But, in spite of the mobility of his features, a mobility which he had more than once studied, as clever actor does, before his mirror, it was on this occasion a labor for him to contract his brows and make his countenance stern and judicial. Except the recollection of the line of politics his father had adopted, and which might interfere, unless he acted with the greatest prudence, with his own career, Villefort was as happy as a man could be. Already rich, he held a high official situation, though only 27. He was about to marry a young and charming woman whom he loved, not passionately, but discreetly, as a magistrate ought to love. And besides her personal attractions, which were very great, Mademoiselle de Saint-Méran's family possessed considerable political influence, which her parents, having no other child, would, of course, exert in his favor. The dowry of his wife amounted to $30,000, besides the prospect of inheriting 100,000 more at her father's death. At the door he met the commissary of police, who was waiting for him. The sight of this officer recalled Villefort from the third heaven to earth. He composed his face as we have before described, and said, "I have read the letter, monsieur, and you have acted rightly in arresting this man. Now inform me what you have discovered concerning him and the conspiracy." "We know nothing as yet of the conspiracy, monsieur. All the papers found have been sealed up and placed on your bureau. The prisoner himself is named Edmond Dantès, mate on board the Three Master, the Pharaon, trading in cotton with Alexandria and Smyrna, and belonging to Morel and Son of Marseille. Before he entered the merchant service, had he ever served in the navy?" "Oh, no, monsieur. He is very young." "How old?" 19 or 20 at the most." At this moment, and as Villefort, following the grand rule, arrived at the corner of the Rue de Conseil, a man who seemed to have been waiting for him approached. It was Monsieur Morel. "Ah, Monsieur de Villefort," cried he, "I am delighted to see you. Some of your people have committed the strangest, most unheard-of mistake. They have just arrested Edmond Dantès, the mate of my ship." "I know it, monsieur," replied Villefort, "and I am now going to examine him." "Oh," said Morel, carried away by his friendship, "you do not know him, and I do. He is the most estimable, the most trustworthy man, and, I will venture to say, the man who knows his business best in all the merchant service. Oh, Monsieur de Villefort, I beseech your indulgence for him." Villefort, as we have seen, belonged to the aristocratic party at Marseille, Morel to the plebeian. The first was an ultra-royalist, the other suspected of Bonapartism. Villefort looked disdainfully at Morel, then replied coldly, "You are aware, monsieur, that a man may be estimable and trustworthy in private life and his commercial relations, and the best seaman in the merchant service, and yet be, politically speaking, a great criminal. Is it not true?" The magistrate laid emphasis on these words, as if he wished to apply them to the owner himself, whilst his eyes seemed to plunge into the heart of him who, whilst he interceded for another, had himself need of indulgence. Morel reddened, for his own conscience was not quite clear on politics. Besides, what Dantès had told him of his interview with the Grand Marshal, and what the Emperor had said to him, embarrassed him. He replied, however, in a tone of deep interest, "I entreat you, Monsieur de Villefort, be just, as is your duty, and as you always are, kind, and give him back to us soon. This give us sounded revolutionary in the sub-prefect's ears. Aha, murmured he, is Dante then a member of some carbonary society, that his protector thus employs this collective form? He was, if I recollect, arrested in a cabaret, in company with a great many others. Then he added aloud, Monsieur, as you may rest assured I shall perform my duty impartially, and that if he be innocent you shall not have appealed to me in vain. Should he, however, be guilty in this present epoch, impunity would furnish a dangerous example, and I must do my duty. As he had now arrived at the door of his own house, which adjoined the Palace de Justice, he entered with an air of majesty, after having saluted with freezing politeness the ship-owner, who stood, as if petrified, on the spot where Villefort left him. The antechamber was full of agents of police and gendarmes, in the midst of whom, carefully watched, but calm and smiling, stood the prisoner. Villefort traversed the antechamber, cast a side glance at Dante, and, taking a packet which gendarme offered him, disappeared, saying, Bring the prisoner. Rapid as had been Villefort's glance, it had served to give him an idea of the man he was about to interrogate. He had recognized intelligence in the high forehead, courage in the dark eyes and bent brow, and frankness in the thick lips that showed a set of pearly teeth. Villefort's first impression was favorable, but he had been so often warned to mistrust first impulses, especially if they were good, that he applied the maxim to the impression, forgetting the difference between the two words. He stifled, therefore, the better instincts that were rising, composed his features before the glass into a grave and menacing aspect, and sat down at his bureau. An instant after, Dante entered. He was pale, but calm and smiling, and, saluting his judge with easy politeness, looked around for a seat, as if he had been in the saloon of Monsieur Marat. It was then that he re-encountered, for the first time, Villefort's look, that look peculiar to lawyers who do not wish their thoughts to be read. This look told him he was in presence of the stern figure of justice. Who and what are you? Demanded Villefort, turning over a pile of papers, containing information relative to the prisoner, that an agent of police had given to him on his entry, which within an hour had become voluminous. So rapidly does the unhappy man, styled and accused, become the object of detective corruption. My name is Edmond Dante, replied the young man calmly. I am mate of the Pharaon, belonging to Messrs. Moreau and Son. Your age? Continued Villefort. 19, returned Dante. What were you doing at the moment you were arrested? I was at the festival of my marriage, monsieur, said the young man, his voice slightly tremulous. So great was the contrast between that happy moment and the painful ceremony he was now undergoing. So great was the contrast between the sombre aspect of Monsieur de Villefort and the radiant face of Mercedes. You were at the festival of your marriage? Said the deputy, shuddering in spite of himself. Yes, monsieur, I am on the point of marrying a young girl I have been attached to for 3 years. Villefort, impassive as he usually was struck with this coincidence, and the tremulous voice of Dante, surprised in the midst of his happiness, struck a sympathetic chord in his own bosom. He was also on the point of being married, and he was summoned from his own happiness to destroy that of a man who, like himself, had happiness at his grasp. This philosophic reflection, thought he, will make a great sensation at Monsieur de Saint-Méran's, and he arranged mentally, whilst Dante awaited further questions, the antithesis by which orators often create with those phrases which sometimes pass for a real eloquence. When the speech was arranged, Villefort turned to Dante. "Continue, sir," said he. "What would you have me to continue?" "To give all the information in your power. Tell me on which point you desire information, and I will tell you all I know. Only," added he, with a smile, "I warn you I know very little." "Have you served under the usurper?" "I was about to be incorporated into the naval forces when he fell." "Is it reported your political opinions are extreme?" said Villefort, who had never heard anything of the kind, but was not sorry to make this inquiry, as if it were an accusation. "My political opinions," replied Dante. "Alas, sir, I never had, I am almost ashamed to say, any opinions. I am hardly 19. I know nothing. I have no part to play. What I am and what I shall be, if I obtain the situation I desire, I shall owe to Monsieur Morel. Thus all my opinions, I will not say public, but private, are confined to these three sentiments. I love my father, I respect Monsieur Morel, and I adore Mercedes. This, sir, is all I can tell you, and you see how uninteresting it is." As Dante spoke, Villefort gazed at his ingenuous and open countenance, and recollected the words of Renée, who, without knowing who the culprit was, had besought his indulgence for him. With the deputy's knowledge of crime and criminals, every word the young man uttered convinced him more and more of his innocence. This lad, for he was scarcely a man, simple, natural, eloquent with that eloquence of the heart never found when sought for, full of affection for everybody, because he was happy, and because happiness renders even the wicked good, extended, even to his judge, the affability which overflowed his heart. Edmond, in his looks, his tones, and his gestures, severe and harsh as Villefort had been, displayed only gentleness and respect. "Pardieu," said Villefort to himself, "he is a noble fellow. I hope I shall gain Renée's favor easily by obeying the first command she ever imposed on me. I shall have at least a pleasure of the hand in public, and a sweet kiss in private." Full of this idea, Villefort's face became so joyous that when he turned to Dante, the latter, who had watched the change on his physiognomy, was smiling also. "Sir," said Villefort, "have you any enemies, at least that you know?" "I have enemies?" replied Dante. "My position is not sufficiently elevated for that. As for my character, that is, perhaps, somewhat too hasty, but I have striven to repress it toward my subordinates. I have had 10 or 12 sailors under me, and if you question them, they will tell you that they love and respect me, not as a father, for I am too young, but as an elder brother. But instead of enemies, you may have excited jealousy. You are about to become captain at 19, an elevated post in your profession. You are about to marry a pretty girl who loves you, a happiness rare in any position. And these two pieces of good fortune may have excited the envy of someone. You are right. You know men better than I do, and what you say may possibly be the case, I confess. But if they are among my friends, I prefer not knowing them, because then I should be forced to hate them. You are wrong. You should always strive to see clearly around you. You seem a worthy young man. I will depart from the strict line of my duty to aid you in throwing light on the matter, by communicating to you the information which has brought you here. Here is the paper. Do you know the writing?" As he spoke, Villefort drew the letter from his pocket and presented it to Dante. Dante read it, a cloud passed over his brow as he said, "No, monsieur, I do not know the writing. It is disguised, and yet it is tolerably plain. Whoever did it writes well. I am very fortunate," added he, looking gratefully at Villefort, "to be examined by such a man as you, for this envious person is a real enemy." And by the rapid glance that the young man's eyes shot forth, Villefort saw how much energy lay beneath this mildness. "Now," said the deputy, "answer me frankly, not as a prisoner to a judge, but as one man in a false position to another who takes an interest in him. What truth is there in the accusation contained in this anonymous letter?" And Villefort threw disdainfully on his bureau the letter Dante had just given back to him. "None at all. I will tell you the real facts. I swear by my honor as a sailor, by my love for Mercedes, and by the life of my father." "Speak, monsieur," said Villefort. Then internally, "If Renée could see me, I hope she would be satisfied, and would no longer call me a decapitator." Well, when we quitted Naples, Captain Leclerc was attacked with a brain fever. As we had no doctor on board, and he was so anxious to arrive at Elba that he would not touch at any other port, his disorder rose to such a height that at the end of the third day, feeling he was dying, he called me to him. "My dear Dante," he said, "swear to perform what I am going to tell you, for it is a matter of the deepest importance." "I swear, Captain," replied I. "Well, as after my death the command devolves on you as mate to assume the command, and bear up for the Isle of Elba, disembark Porto Ferrajo, ask for the Grand Marshal, give him this letter. Perhaps he will give you another letter, and charge you with a commission. You will accomplish the mission that I was to have done, and derive all the honor from it. I will do it, Captain, but perhaps I shall not be admitted to the Grand Marshal's presence as easily as you expect." "Here is a ring that will obtain audience of him, and remove every difficulty," said the captain. And at these words he gave me a ring. It was time. 2 hours after he was delirious. The next day he died. And what did you do then? What I ought to have done, and what everyone would have done in my place. Everywhere the last requests of a dying man are sacred. But with a sailor the last requests of his superior are commands. I sailed for the Isle of Elba, where I arrived the next day. I ordered everybody to remain on board, and went on shore alone. As I had expected, I found some difficulty in obtaining access to the Grand Marshal, but I sent the ring I had received as my credentials, and was instantly admitted. He questioned me concerning Captain Leclerc's death, and, as the latter had told me, gave me a letter to carry in person to Paris. I undertook it because it was what my captain had bade me do. I landed here, regulated the affairs of the vessel, and hastened to visit my affianced bride, whom I found more lovely than ever. Thanks to Monsieur Morel, all the forms were got over. In a word, I was, as I told you, at my marriage feast, and I should have been married in an hour, and tomorrow I intended to start for Paris, when, on this accusation which you now seem to despise as much as I do, I was arrested." "Ah," said Villefort, "this seems to me the truth. If you have been culpable, it was imprudence, and this imprudence was legitimized by the order of your captain. Give up this letter you have brought from Elba, and pass your word your will appear should you be required, and go and rejoin your friends." "I am free then, sir?" cried Dante, joyfully. "Yes, but first give me this letter. You have it already, for it was taken from me with some others which I see in that packet." "Stop a moment," said the deputy. as Dante took his hat and gloves. To whom is it addressed? To Monsieur Noirtier, Rue Croix Heron, Paris. Had a thunderbolt fallen into the room, Villefort could have not been more stupefied. He sank into his seat, and, hastily turning over the packet, drew forth the fatal letter, at which he glanced with an expression of terror. Monsieur Noirtier, Rue Coq Heron, number 13, murmured he, growing still paler. Yes, said Dante. Do you then know him? No, replied Villefort. A faithful servant of the king does not know conspirators. It is a conspiracy, then? Asked Dante, who, after believing himself free, now began to feel a tenfold alarm. I have already told you, however, sir, I was ignorant of the contents of the letter. Yes, but you knew the name of the person to whom it was addressed, said Villefort. I was forced to read the address to know to whom to give it. Have you shown this letter to anyone? Asked Villefort, becoming still more pale. To no one, on my honor. Everybody is ignorant that you are the bearer of a letter from the Isle of Elba, and addressed to Monsieur Noirtier. Everybody except the person who gave it to me. This is too much, murmured Villefort. Villefort's brow darkened more and more. His white lips and clenched teeth filled Dante with apprehension. After reading the letter, Villefort covered his face with his hands, and remained for an instant overpowered. Oh, said Dante, timidly, what is the matter? Villefort made no answer, but raised his head at the expiration of a few seconds, and again pursued the letter. You give me your honor that you are ignorant of the contents of this letter. I give you my honor, sir, said Dante. But what is the matter? You are ill. Shall I ring for assistance? Shall I call? No, said Villefort, rising hastily. Stay where you are. Don't say a word. It is for me to give orders here, not you. Monsieur, replied Dante, proudly, it was only to summon assistance for you. I want none. It was a temporary indisposition. Attend to yourself. Answer me. Dante waited, expecting a question, but in vain. Villefort fell back on his chair, passed his hand over his brow, moist with perspiration, and, for the third time, read the letter. Oh, if he knows the contents of this, murmured he, and that Noirtier is the father of Villefort, I am lost. And he fixed his eyes upon Edmond, as if he would have penetrated his thoughts. Oh, it is impossible to doubt it, cried he suddenly. In heaven's name, cried the unhappy young man, if you doubt me, question me, I will answer you. Villefort made a violent effort, and in a tone he strove to render firm. Sir, said he, your examination has resulted in very grave charges against you. I am no longer able, as I had hoped, to restore you immediately to liberty. Before doing so, I must consult the judge of instruction. But you see how I have behaved toward you. Oh, monsieur, and I thank you, cried Dante. You have been rather a friend than a judge. Well, I must detain you some time longer, but I will strive to make it as short as possible. The principal charge against you is this letter, and you see. Villefort approached the fire, cast it in, and waited until it was entirely consumed. You see, I destroyed it. Oh, exclaimed Dante, you are goodness itself. Listen, continued Villefort. You can now have confidence in me after what I have done. Oh, order me, and I will obey. Listen, this is not an order, but a counsel I give you. Speak, and I will follow your advice. I shall detain you until this evening in the Palace de Justice. Should anyone else interrogate you, tell him all you have told me, and do not breathe a word of this letter. I promise. It was Villefort who seemed to entreat, and the prisoner who reassured him. You see, continued he, looking at the ashes which still remained the shape of the paper and were dancing about the flames. This letter is destroyed. You and I alone know of its existence. Should you, therefore, be questioned, deny all knowledge of it. Fear nothing. I will deny it. Good, said Wilford, laying his hand on the bell rope, and then checking himself. It was only the letter you had. It was. Swear it. I swear it. Wilford rang. An agent of police entered. Wilford whispered some words in his ear, to which the officer replied by a motion of his head. Follow him, said Wilford to Dante. Dante saluted Wilford and retired. Hardly had the door closed than Wilford threw himself into a chair, nearly fainting. Alas, alas, murmured he, on what chances life and fortune depend. If the Procureur du Roi had been at Marseille, if the judge of instruction had been called instead of me, I should have been ruined. This paper, this accursed letter, should have destroyed all my hopes. Oh, my father, will you always be an obstacle to my happiness, and I forever to struggle against your past? Suddenly a light seemed to pass over his spirit and illuminate his face. A smile played round his mouth, and his lips became unclenched, and his haggard eyes seemed to pause on some new thought. This will do, said he, and from this letter, which might have ruined me, I will make my fortune. And after having assured himself the prisoner was gone, the deputy procureur hastened to the house of his bride.